Hello, thank you for tuning in to my second interview with my grandfather, Robert Schiavoni. Had a lot of views on the first video, and people keep asking, when's the next one coming? So this is it. So in the first video, I think we got to, in essence, the early 80s. And I shared with you, I wanted to circle back and talk about your childhood more in depth because you have an experience that the rest of our family will never get to experience, being first generation American, but having parents who were immigrants. That's a situation that I would suspect our family's never going to replicate unless we immigrate to another country at some point. And after we spoke, you played a song for me. It was to music, but it was more of a narration about the Italian American experience. And it was really neat because it resonated with you about how traditions got lost over time, and as people become Americanized, and the families get spread out geographically, and those kind of things. And I wanted to start off this interview talking to you about that. There was one thing that I remember from that video that was really neat.
Hey, be careful.
And your dog doesn't like this.
No, Daddy, no. You'll wait.
So talk about part of the clip that you played for me was talking about the Italian Sundays.
Yeah.
From going to mass to the family get-togethers. Could you talk about that? What do you remember about your family get-togethers on Sundays?
Well, routine. My mother was Italian and she was a good cook. And Sunday morning, she put on the spaghetti sauce. Made all their sauce and all that, and had it simmering with the meat and stuff in there, knuckle bones, and she used to make these rolled up veal with spices in it, and it was in the sauce. And when we come home from church, we weren't allowed to put the radio on in the morning. When I was a kid, we had no television.
Mm-hmm.
But we weren't allowed to turn the radio on until after lunch. I shall behave. And my reward after coming out of church, she would take some of those meats out of there and some sauce and put it in a little dish. And I'd take some good fresh Italian bread and dip it in the sauce, and I'd eat that meat that she had made in there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes she'd wrap veal, real thin slices of veal, with all kinds of spices in it, and put a toothpick in it, and then let it soak it would simmer 3 to 4 hours in the sauce. But boy, was it good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the spaghetti every Sunday. We'd have the spaghetti dinner. And that was, and then when we come out of church, you turn out this Italian hour. They used to call it the Italian hour, and we played all Italian music and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And recently we went to they had a Oktoberfest. No, they had an Italian day at the what do they call it? At the not the playground, but the fairgrounds.
Mm.
And they were over there. They had this different tents, had different music and all, and they were playing these old Italian music. Bring things to my attention. Asha, what do you want on my lap? So that was okay here.
All right.
So she's part of the family.
Yes.
Yeah. So and we always had like in that video I showed you, the tape. Every Thursday, the chicken man used to come in with live chicken and deliver it to the house. Then I'd help my mother kill it, and she'd make this boiling water, and we'd pluck the feathers out and everything for dinner and all. And we had fresh milk delivered on the porch every morning. And I'd go out there and snitch the cream off the top, because they didn't process. Years ago, they didn't process. They just brought the container, regular milk container, and I would scoop off the cream on the top, and she would get mad. And the Sheeny man used to come out with the little wagon in the back, and they had all kind of dresses and clothes for kids and all. And my mother used to go out and buy some of that stuff. Then we had the guy who used to come around, a knife sharpener. That was everything used to come to the house. You didn't have to go shopping. Yeah, that was the old days.
Yeah. So when you had the Sunday get-togethers, the Sunday dinner, was it your immediate family? Did you have other family and members?
No, just our immediate family. And, even when my brothers I wasn't married at the time, but my brothers used to be, and they'd bring their family every Sunday. We used to go there, and then after the dinner and everything, me, my dad, my brothers, we'd get down to the Italian club and play shuffleboard. That was the routine there.
What traditions do you remember? I think you've probably mentioned a couple of them. What Italian traditions do you remember that have become lost as years have gone by? You mentioned you listen to Italian songs on the radio.
Yeah. Well, my parents, once they passed away, we didn't have all that. And we didn't have those Sunday dinners. And it's just like, that's the tradition. When I lost my parents, then I lost the tradition.
Yeah.
So.
And not all the brothers were spread out, but you did have some family.
Well, at that time, my father had that bus line and taxis, so at that time, we were all in Masontown. Later on, when business went down and all that, we didn't need. One brother went to Pittsburgh and worked for the steel company, and then eventually, after the war, there was no. Everybody bought a lot of cars, so now you had no taxi business and no bus lines and all. And we finally got rid of that. And when I come out of the service, I think I mentioned that I used to drive bus and taxi all the time. And one brother was in the service, and when I think I mentioned that they wouldn't draft me until he came back from the service, because I was helping my dad run the bus line. But 2 weeks after he came back, they drafted me again. But yeah, when we lost that, that's the tradition we had at the time, Sundays, and my mother always, like I said, Monday morning, I think she washed clothes, and Tuesday she ironed clothes and all that stuff. And then Friday and Saturday she cleaned house and all that stuff. Yeah, that was tradition. Then I'd go out and play on a Friday or Saturday, When I come in the house, I had to wash. They had scrubbed the floors, and they had newspapers all over the floor. And you had to watch when you walked in. You had to take your shoes off because you tracked mud through the house. But that was clockwork. You know, there were certain days to do things. And now we have automatic washers and all that stuff, so it's not a big draw. And then you have clothes you don't have to iron no more.
Right. Because your parents immigrated to the United States, did they ever talk to you about what they wanted you as children to do, or did they ever talk about the difference between Italy and the United States and why they came and what they hoped for each of you?
You know, that's why I think this program you got is good, because I never knew much about what my parents did when they were young and all that. My wife knew more because she'd sit with my mother and my mother would talk about her past. And we never did. So this would be nice for my kids, my children. They would know what my past was like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very good program for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking just on the phone a couple of days ago, and you were asking me. You always ask me, "What are we going to talk about? What are we going to talk about?" And you shared a couple stories with me, and there was one in particular that was really good. You had experience saving a life.
Yeah.
In your neighborhood, and it really had an impact on you. Can you share that story?
Yeah, there was 2 impacts. Me and my wife and grandma we used to watch that Criminal Minds all the time. And there was one series in there that they went into this cave, and when I was a kid, had to be about 16 years old, 17. I had my driver's license. And I used to go up in the mountains with me, my 2 brother-in-laws. At that time, we were single. But we would go up in the mountains around Uniontown. And we'd go up to this Delaney's cave. At that time, it was just a hole in the ground. And when you go down into that cave, we'd bring a ball of string with us and flashlights and all. And you go down this hole and you go in there and there's a big room. And it'd be all lit up. And they had different little crevices where water washed through. And you'd crawl through these holes and you'd come out in another big room. And we used to play in there all the time. And this one time, I went to crawl in this one room, and I got stuck in that hole. And I'm trying to move. And the more I tried to move, the more excited I got, and I was tense, and my body would expand, and I couldn't move. So I thought to myself, I better relax so my body don't expand like it was doing. And little by little, I shimmied out of there. And we carried this string with us so we know because there was so many passages in there. We'd have this ball of string so we knew where we come in and where we were going to go out. And in this one particular program in Criminal Minds, they went into one of these caves and they found a skeleton in one of these. Now, I'm thinking that's when I would get that anxiety. And I'd go blank when I saw that movie. And then another program that they used to have is there was a fire and they were trying to save this people, and they were grabbing a hold of the people, and this flesh was coming out in my hand, and that would set me off too. And my wife would ask me, why you don't like it? And I never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Either one of those. I never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working for Masontown Bus Line. I was doing the mechanic work on their buses. When I put her down. I was working in their garage at their garage where they were repairing. I was working on one of the bus motors,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard this big explosion. So it just so happened that my brother-in-law's dad had a garage right next to us, and the owner of the bus line. We all ran over there because of the explosion. And here in the old days, some of those houses, you couldn't go down the basement. They had a little steps and everything covered outside, and you go down. And I seen this. We went in the backyard, and I seen this doors were open to go down to that basement, and steam was coming out of there, and this woman was screaming. She was putting coal in the stove, in the furnace. And years ago, they used to buy these, from a small mine, they used to get these coal and everything. And a lot of times, the coal miners would leave these explosion caps for when they used to blow up when they get the coal. And there must have been one in that boiler, in that shovel, and she was putting that stuff in there, and it was a steam furnace, a boiler furnace, and she had all these hot coals, and when that thing exploded, it busted the water jackets inside the furnace, and that went all over the coals, and she's standing there, and all that steam and everything come up in her face. And the basement was just full of smoke and steam. And I said, I'm going down to see if I can get her out. She just stood there in front of the furnace screaming. So I'm walking in there, following where the voice was coming from. And I was just ready to go back out because I couldn't breathe. And I finally grabbed a hold of her arm, and her flesh was just coming off of my hand. And that's a weird feeling. So I had to go grab her, and I walked her out through the steam and smoke, and took her out. And then these two gentlemen, they laid her out in the grass there, and we called the ambulance and all. But I know I saved her life, but that was weird, because I thought I was going to go too, because that was hot, that steam, and then they had the regular smoke from the coals, and that's an experience I don't even, and I never told anybody about it, you know, other than the people that was with me, they knew about it, but that was a weird experience. And when they had that program on Criminal Minds, and my wife would say, why don't you like it? I told her about the experience. She said, well, you never talked about it. I said, no, I don't like to talk about it. But yeah, those experiences that you don't know what you're going to do. You know? You don't know if you're going to make it out or not.
Right.
But she was screaming, man. She was a terrible scream. And the next day, her daughter, I was out there working on one of the buses, and she come walking by, and she says, are you the guy that saved my mother, pulled my mother out of that steam and all? I says, yeah. And she told me, thanks. But that was the only thing that ever, it was not in the papers, nothing. Nobody knew about it other than me.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an experience.
And how old were you at that time?
I had, I was out of the service, so I had to be 23, 24 years old at the time. That, when I was in there with the caves, Delaney Caves. I must have been 16, 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that Delaney's Cave was just a hole in the ground. Then they had this big room in there. Mm-hmm. But the reason they call it Delaney's Cave, the Delaney brothers, years ago, used to rob trains in Uniontown. And that's where they used to hide out, up in that Delaney's Cave. Now it's a monument.
Yes.
They dug it up real good, and they had a big opening that you can go in and you can walk in. They charge you to go in.
And we've been in there.
You've been in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's, it don't have, you're not allowed to go into those little crevices. You go in these big rooms, and they probably open them up so you can go in each one of those rooms. There was several big rooms in there. But we'd play in there, we'd have flashlights and go in there, and it was exciting for us.
Yeah, I'm curious about, because you read about this, there's always, I would say, a fair amount of tension between generations anyway, about customs and traditions versus younger generations arguing and wanting to do something different. Do you ever remember a time where you got in arguments with your mom or dad about you were trying to become, I'll just say for lack of a better term, more American, or you had friends doing things different that your mom and dad said, no,
years ago,
we're Italian, we don't do that?
Years ago, we were living in my aunt's apartment. I don't know if you ever been there. She used to have a store there. And one side of the first floor was all the store. And the other side is where my aunt used to live. And we rented a whole upstairs, our whole family. There was, 4 or 5 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen and all. We used to live up there. And we overlooked the public school, grade school was there. And we'd go play out there until sunset. And we had to be home. So my mother could actually see us out there. It's not like today. You don't dare leave your kid go out because they get kidnapped and all. But we go out and play, and we knew we had to be in. If you didn't, you got a little belt on your butt. My mother was the executor. My dad, my mother never allowed me to, like, a lot of times I had some Irish friends and they had a birthday party. I wasn't allowed to go because they were Irish and I was Italian. So that was one of the traditions. Well, and it goes with all of them. And like when I was going with my first wife, they were Slovak, and they didn't particularly care for me because I was Italian, okay? But they finally realized I wasn't a bad guy. So it wasn't until I went to the service I really, I told you I was used to, my first wife, we used to have a bus line that went down to the flats. We used to run through their little mining towns. And her mother and father used to ride the bus, and I used to see her walking with her girlfriend all the time. And I'd stop and talk to her and all that. And then they decided to move to Masontown. And I think I told you the story where she was going to this Catholic school in Leckroom at the time. And she wanted to see, maybe go to All Saints School where I was going. So the nuns told me to bring her in to sit with me in class one time. So we went in, and that's how I started going with my wife. And our dates were, I used to drive taxi every night. And a lot of times she'd be walking over to her girlfriend's house, and I'd pick her up. And she'd, maybe 7 o'clock in the evening, and she'd ride around with me in a taxi. and till about 9 o'clock, and I'd drop it off. She always told her mother that she was at a girlfriend's house. And it wasn't really until I was in the service that she realized that I was dating her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe I told you where I was stationed in Camp Pickett. Yeah. And her and her girlfriend came down because she was gone with my buddy that was going to school with me. Mm-hmm. And we were stationed at the same Camp Pickett, mm-hmm. the medical corps there. And they came down on a weekend. I had a weekend pass, and we'd go down to the square dances and all down there, mm-hmm. in Virginia. Mm-hmm. But that's how I first met my first wife.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about your parents, and they sound like extraordinary people. I mean, they're not famous, they're not celebrities, but
no,
they're extraordinary people. Just the immigration, the coming over, providing a good life for your family. What were some values that you've taken from them? You've lived a long life. What are some values that you know that you've taken from them and they're never going away?
Well, they were very honest people. Mm-hmm. And you never did no wrong. And I sort of were like that. I never hurt people, and you know, it never hurt me. Mm-hmm. But I never got in fights. Well, I tell you, one incident, we used to play in that playground at the school there. Mm-hmm. And this one little kid, he was a small kid, mm-hmm. and we used to call him Dynamite. And my father was always easygoing, mm-hmm. and honest and friendly, and he'd help anybody, mm-hmm. you know. And this Dynamite would always pick fights with people. And his father was the mayor of the town. Mm. And his father, they used to have fights in the school, you know, organized
boxing
fights,
matches.
Boxing matches. Mm-hmm. And he used to box a lot. So he was over there, he was always picking on the kids and everything. And when he fight with you, he hit you in the face all the time. And I was a lot bigger than he was. But he would start fighting with me, and I didn't want to fight with him. I would just grab him and get him in a bear hug. He couldn't move until he stopped breathing almost. Then I let him go. He never bothered me no more. So that's like my dad. He never got in no fights. Mm-hmm. And he used to help people. Like this older couple used to live on one of our bus trips we used to have. And I'd have to stop at a railroad track all the time, open the door on the bus and all. Mm-hmm. And this older couple lived way down the tracks. And they used to have a farm out there. And my dad used to give them free rides on the bus. And every spring, or every fall, he would give us a little goat, a nanny goat, they call them. And we'd slaughter that, and he never charged them, and they would give us a goat every fall. Mm-hmm. And we'd butcher it and all, and have young, what do they call that goat meat? The young goat meat. It was good. Mm-hmm. But he was good that way. Mm-hmm. And what other tradition? He was always good. And when he used to tell us, when you're taking the taxi trips and you take these young women out to trip, I don't want you to take it out on trade. Yeah. He said he never wanted us to fool around. Huh? Yeah. He told us, no, You let them pay, and that's it. Because I imagine he had a lot of offers too when he was young, and so he was honest that way. He never wanted us to fool around or nothing. So in a way, I was raised that way, and yeah, that's my dad. He never drank. Every summer for 4th of July, he'd load up the bus, one of the buses, with all our friends and families and all, and we would go to this park called Shady Grove, right in near Uniontown, and it was always for 4th of July, and we'd bring all our picnic stuff, and we'd have this picnics in these pavilions they had out there in these parks, and they had rides like Ferris wheels and stuff like that there. And then in the evening we'd have the fireworks and all. And every once in a while he'd have these little pony bottles of beer. That's the only time I'd ever see him drink. He never drank. And I never, well, I didn't start drinking until I went to the service. And I used to spend a lot of time at the hall. And then when I got out of the service, then the weekends I used to go out with my friends and drink a little bit. But after I got married, the wife put a stop to that. Yeah.
And what about your mom?
My mom never drank. She never.
I'm sorry. What did you learn from your mom? What were the values that you remember about her?
She was a very good cook. And I had my younger sister. She was about 5 years younger than I was. And she always made me watch her. Okay. And me and my buddies, a lot of times we'd go out into the woods. In them days, we never even wore shoes. We always walked around on barefoot. And me and my buddies, we went to this woods. And after we was in the woods and everything, my buddy says, "Hey, your sister's back here. She's following us." And I said, "Oh boy, my mother will kill us if she knew she was with us." So I had to take her home. And I had to carry her through this open field, and they had the blackberry bushes in there with the thorns and everything in. And I had to carry her through that with my foot, all the thorns. And I got home. My foot swelled up and all that poison and poison ivy and all that.
Oh, jeez.
I had a heck of a time with that. Oh, I used to hate that, taking care of my sister. I was always stuck with her. And there was other times that whatever happened, I was ready to think about it. But my mother always reminded me, I had to watch my sister. So and I never had to touch her. I never touched her. I couldn't hit her. But my mother she was always happy, and I guess I'm more like my mom. My dad was easy gone too, and I just that type of person. I guess I got that from them. I wasn't wild. My one brother was a pretty wild guy. He'd go out, he'd give fights all the time. But, and that's what I got from my mother. She was easy gone, and that's what I was always like that.
What What language did your mom and dad talk in the house? Was it Italian only, or did they talk English too?
No, you know, that's when they came to this country, they had to learn English.
Mm-hmm.
And you get these Spanish people come over now. They want us to change to their tradition.
Mm-hmm.
When my mother come over, they had to learn English, and they had to go to school
Mm-hmm.
to learn all this. And nowadays, these people come over, they don't have to learn all that stuff, you know, before they become a citizen and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And but my mother, only time she would use the Italian, she used to swear in Italian. So I learned a lot of swear words in Italian. But she always talked English in the home. Once in a while with broken English, a little bit of Italian stuck in there and all that. Later I learned, about 30 years ago or something. Oh, more than that. 50 years ago I took her to Italy. Mm-hmm. And my cousins couldn't understand my mother, and they understood me better because my mother would always talk broken English, and they couldn't understand her. Yeah. So I could understand a little bit when they were talking, so I knew what they were talking about. But they never knew English, so. But she always talked English to us. A lot of these people today, they talk in their foreign language. Well, it's like my first wife. They talked a lot of Slovak. They were Slovak. But they talk English too. But they never talked all Slovak. And my second wife was Hungarian. And that's all they talked was Hungarian. Okay. And my wife used to go to Hungarian school. She'd go to regular school and Hungarian school. But, yeah, that's...
What about your father? Did he have a thick accent?
No, he talked pretty good English. And he used to take some Italian words, cussing. But he talked mostly English. But it had that little roll, like Italian language, that roll, the tongue roll when they talked.
You know where I'm going with this? Can you do an impression of your dad talking?
You know, my dad, it's like you younger kids. Spend a lot of time with your kids. I see that now. My dad, he'd go to work 6 o'clock in the morning. He'd go out and drive buses and taxis and all that. And he'd come home at 6 o'clock. And it's the only time I seen him. He'd come home for supper, and he was in bed at 7 o'clock. Because he was up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning every morning. So he's never played with us or nothing. And that's where I make you kids play with your kids and spend time with your kids. And we never had that with my parents. They never played. The only time I seen my dad in the way he was is when he went on picnics and stuff with him. And then when he was older, on the Sundays, we'd have to, after dinner, him and my brothers would go down to the Italian club, play shuffleboard. And I got to know my dad a little bit then. But I didn't know my dad much at all because he's always working. He was a workaholic. Yeah. So, yeah, I watch your kids with your parents, with your children and all that, and the way she handled her kids. Every one of you play with your parents. Your parents spend a lot of time with you. But in that tradition, in the older tradition, all of them, our parents are all workaholics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's like I say, we used to live down at my uncle's and my aunt's upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Then back in it must have been around 1939, my dad bought that big house up closer to town.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple blocks away from where we were living. It was a big house. I had 14 rooms in it. It was a big house.
Mm-hmm.
And we had bedrooms were big. And me and my other three brothers would sleep in one bedroom. We had two big beds next to each other, plus it all kind of room. There's a big room, and my parents had another room, and then a little bit beyond there, near the bathroom, they had this one room. Wasn't as big as the other one, but that's where my sister lived. I mean, she slept there, and what was I going to start saying? Oh, anyhow, we was in there, and we had no television at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we used to sit there and listen to Amos and Andy on the television, on the radio and all those inner sanctum mysteries and all that. We'd sit there and watch radio. And I remember we were all sitting on the floor, me and my sister. And my sister I had to be around 7 or 8. She was only 2 or 3 years old at the time. It was 1941. And I remember when Roosevelt came on the television,
mm-hmm.
and announced Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that just as plain as day today.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I wanted to ask you about that too, so we'll get back to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't later till when television first come out, we used to go up to the furniture store up in town, and the furniture store had a television set up right by the big glass windows, and had speakers outside, and they allowed people to go over and sit down and watch. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what you couldn't afford them at that time.
Right.
And then later on, when people, maybe somebody in a block had a TV, they'd invite everybody over to the house, and that's where these TV dinners come in.
Mm.
They used to make these little TV dinners,
Mm-hmm.
and then put them, stove, warm it up, and all that, and eat. And then they had, and there was a real small tube television. It wasn't like you got today.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember those days when I had to be. Let's see, when the Pearl Harbor was born, must have been. I was only about 7 or 8 years old.
Hmm.
So my sister had to be only 2 years old, something like that. And yeah. But we didn't have the stuff that they have today.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about World War II in a minute, because it's a very unique time. But before I do that, I want to ask this question for the benefit of your children. What do you remember about the way your parents interacted with your children?
During the war?
No. Your parents became grandparents for your children.
Oh, yeah.
What memories do you have about your mom and dad playing with your children?
Oh, they used to love our children.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They did everything. They spoiled the hell out of them.
Yeah.
They give them things that I couldn't give them,
Yeah.
And they were real good with the children. The children they were gold to them, you know. Yeah, and they would light up like a Christmas tree. I remember when I remember one time when I had this set of twins. My wife went to the hospital, and it was early in the morning. You know, it must have been around midnight. Mm-hmm. I ended up in the hospital, so I ended up coming home pretty late. Might have come home about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I come walking in my house, and my dad and mom was still upstairs. And my dad says, "Everything okay? You have a baby? Was it a boy or girl?" I says, "Yeah." He said, "No, was it a boy or girl?" I said, "Both." He said, "Son of a gun." Yeah. Yeah, they were happy when we had kids. Everything was for the kids. Mm-hmm. And I'd come in, they'd cook for them, everything, whatever they wanted, and this and that.
And how often did they get to see each other?
At the time, I was staying down with my when I had my children, the first one was born in Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Right. That was your mother. Mm-hmm. And when I come from the service, man, they treat us like gold. But after that, after about a month or so there, I was staying at my wife's mom's, my mother-in-law's. And when they delivered my furniture and all, I rented an apartment at my aunt's house where I used to live when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And they used to, where the store was, and they had an apartment there with 2 bedrooms, 2 or 3 bedrooms in there. Mm-hmm. And we rent that, so we stayed there. But we used to walk up my mom's house, just about a block or so up ahead, all the time. And she had candy, ice cream, everything for the kids, you know. But at that time, they already was maybe in their 60s or 70s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had to be, yeah. See, they wasn't able to take them out and do things with them, you know. Mm-hmm. But like I say, my dad never played with us, you know, because he was busy working all the time. Mm-hmm. The only time I'd see him is when he'd come home for supper, and then after he ate and everything, he went to bed because he had to get up early in the morning. Mm-hmm.
So did he get to play with your children more?
Well, yeah, he used to play with in the living room. They used to play around with them, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't where they would take them to a movie or something like that, or a playground. And at that time, we didn't have the Disneyland and all that stuff, so it was not much. And our town at the time, I think we only had 1 swimming pool. And we'd go there once in a while. Mm-hmm. But I was already... Well, I was 12 or 13, but they'd give us money to go down there, but they wouldn't come. They would go down there once in a while with us. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't where they would play with us much. They'd play with the kids, you know, just play with them in the house and that thing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't where they took them out to, like you take them to the park and all that, and fish with them and all that. No, he never did that with us. Mm-hmm. that's the older generation, and from what I could see, all my friends are the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the entertainment for kids like they do today.
Mm-hmm.
It was mostly the contact was at the house,
Mm-hmm.
and they play with you there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that was all. Nowadays, you know, you play ball with the kids and do everything with the kids.
Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of that, your in-laws from your first wife, how much did your children interact with them?
Well, they interact with them quite a bit.
Yeah.
They were just like my mom. They
Yeah.
loved the kids.
Yeah.
They loved the kids. Everything was for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came there, they made them special things, whatever they liked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was. But it's not like how you interact with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like your mom and dad, how they interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't think my parents. Probably my mom might have been in her 30s when she had the first child. My brother Joe was born in 1929 or something like that. She was already in her 30s, 32, I think. And that time we had the diapers. I wash them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like now you got to throw away stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I see you kids changing diapers and all that. And
Yeah.
My dad never changed the diapers. It was all mom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And my mom, she was a disciplinarian, what do you call them?
Uh-huh.
She disciplined. If I wasn't home on time and all that, I got the little strap on the butt.
Uh-huh.
And my mom, she never liked us to go out and play. She always wanted us at home. And a lot of times in the winter, they'd never buy us anything. My brother bought me a sled one time.
Mm-hmm.
I had to be in my maybe 12 years old, 13, and he was 4 years, 5 years. He was 4 years older than I was. He was already driving taxis, and he had money. And he bought me a sled one year. I was never able to use it. So a lot of times I'd come home from school, I'd go in the basement. And my mom, especially on a Wednesday evening, my mom used to belong to this Italian ladies circle. And they'd go play cards, bridge, and all that stuff. And I knew my mom would be gone. So I'd go down the basement, grab my sled, and take off. And we'd go sled riding up on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't come home until I knew my mother, 7 o'clock, she was gone to this lady circles meeting they had, play cards and all. And I'd come home when I knew she was gone. I'd sneak in the basement, change my clothes and everything. Then I'd go to bed. And around 9 o'clock when she'd come home, she'd come in and open the door. I could pretend like I'm sleeping. And she'd come in. A lot of times she'd pretend like I'm asleep, and she'd come in and look at me, and I could see her, she was looking at me. And then she'd walk out. But sometimes she would be real mad. And she'd pull the covers back and start smacking me with that belt, the shaving belt my dad used to have. And I'd run in the bathroom and lock the door. And she'd be out there, and I have to go to the bathroom. You got it? No, I wouldn't let her in. Yeah, she would. But my dad never raised his hand against her. I remember one time my oldest brother, he was acting crazy one time. He wouldn't listen to my mom. I forget what he was doing. he was running around in the kitchen, and he had this dish in his hand. And for somehow he was swinging around, acting crazy, and he hit the light. It busted the light. Oh, my dad gave him a whipping. That's the first whipping I ever seen him give, because he never did whip us that much. My mother did all of this. And then, oh, she was so mad, she wouldn't let him out of the house, and he was hiding under the kitchen table, and he was trying to get a hold of him. I remember that. But that was the only time I ever seen my dad give anybody a whipping. He never whipped me. I was an angel all the time.
Right.
But when I used to sneak out and go play, my mother used, after dark, at that winter time, it gets dark 5 o'clock or whatever.
Right.
And when I come home from school, I'd sneak down and get my sled and go sled riding. And when I come home, I got up. But she didn't allow us to go out in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
She was real protective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more questions, and I'd like to wrap up this segment up here because we're approaching an hour.
Okay.
You had 2 monumental events in your childhood, and I'm not talking about just you in particular, but the entire world. Great Depression and World War II.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the Great Depression?
World War II.
Well, let's talk about the Great Depression first. Do you remember much about that? Heard your parents talk about it at all?
Well, I was born in 1933, and that was about the end of the Depression, wasn't it?
No, it was about middle of it. Because it started in 1929. And I think 1932 and 1933 was when it was at its worst.
Yeah, so I didn't know much, but I knew during the Second World War, I remember they had the food stamp. They used to ration food stamp.
Right.
And every family gets so much food stamps, and you go to the store, you couldn't buy anything unless you had that stamp. Everything was rationed at that time. Then they have the air raids. And I remember...
Well, let's back up for a moment. So, you don't remember much about the Great Depression, and that makes sense. You were pretty young.
Yeah.
You mentioned this before. Where were you? What do you remember, and where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, we continuously stand by the radio because that's the only time you heard any news about the radio, about the war. And then when you went to a movie theater, they always had like a double feature, but in the middle of both features, they had movies of the war, what was going on. That's the only time you heard what's going on in the war. And but I remember that speech every time they'd come on and talk about that speech he said about Japan hit Pearl Harbor.
The day that will live in infamy.
Yeah, infamy. Yeah, I remember that. This plain day. Me and my little sister was listening to that. But my oldest brother ended up in the Second World War. And that was, at the time they used to be called the Army Air Force. Now it's just the Air Force.
Right.
At that time it was the Army Air Force. And he was stationed in Shepherdfield, Texas. I don't know whereabouts that was. But I remember he used to get pictures. He used to send pictures of us and all that. But he stayed... So I don't remember. I remember him being in the Air Force, in that Army Air Force. But he never had to go to combat. Because the war ended, what, at 44, 45?
Yeah.
And I remember my dad, you couldn't buy a car, another taxi. I mean, he had to drive the old cars until 45. And we used to have our cars made special for taxis. They were made heavy duty, like police cars. The seats were heavy duty and all that. And my dad had to put an order in. He got one in 44. But he had to wait for it to come in, built and all that, because they weren't building cars during the war. They were building tanks and all that stuff. But everything was rationed, and I remember I was only 12 or 13 years old. Or no, I was only about 11, 12. But anyhow, they'd have these air raids. You'd hear the sirens go off, and you weren't allowed on the streets. You weren't allowed to turn any lights on in a house. They had a guy with an armband, used to walk around the streets, and if he seen any lights on, they could come and arrest you, okay? Because everything had to be blackout. And we had this little closet in the hallway upstairs, and it had like sliding doors used to be in there, and the bottom was all empty. And me and my brothers and everything would climb inside this closet and with a flashlight and close the outside door and that other door, and so we couldn't see no light. And we'd go there and play in there while the drill was on.
How long did those last?
They only lasted maybe 15 minutes, half hour, something like that. But in the inner city, they had on the 2-story homes and all. They always had a lookout where you could go out there and watch for airplanes. They had people trained to go out there and watch for airplanes. And today you can still go through Cleveland. In the older homes, and you could see these little cubby holes cut in the roof where you could, like a lookout for planes and stuff like that. But they had certain people in the vicinity, that was their jobs. They did that, and they had these armbands, and they could make you go off the streets. They were making sure the streets were clean and nobody had lights on. Yeah, that was something that I remember when I was a kid during the Second World War. But
something I'm interested in, obviously, Pearl Harbor happens. United States declares war on Japan. Well, the chain reaction is your home country is now fighting the United States. Do you remember any feelings your parents had about that?
No.
Did you talk about that at all?
But I had some friends that I worked with later on in years. He was Japanese, and his name happened to be Yamamoto, and he was the guy that was in charge of that.
Yeah, he's the admiral.
Yeah, he was an admiral. And his name was Yamamoto. Now, he told me during the Second World War, they were in a concentration camp in California.
Right.
Yeah. And his parents were locked up in there. And if you were Japanese, they put you in a concentration camp. You know, no ifs, ands, and buts.
Yeah, it was...
But the Italians, no. We weren't signaled out. Because the Italians weren't really, they were just occupied by the Germans. They weren't really fighting in there.
You
They
don't
said
remember?
the Italians were just lovers. They were no, not fighters. So it was they had taken over the country with Mussolini. He made a deal with Mussolini,
Right.
and my parents used to hate Mussolini because of that. You know? But they never talked much about their country being invaded and all that. Yeah. So we weren't really fighting against Italy. It was the Germans. It was they occupied, and they were fighting, but they didn't have the Italian army behind them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we wrap up there and we'll take a break and then we'll talk some more.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you for watching. So now we've gone back to your childhood a little bit.
Okay.
So that was some really great stories, and what we'll do now is we'll circle back and talk about adulthood.
Okay.
On our next video. So thank you for watching and have a great day.